two siblings sat quietly in the plush first-class section of the airplane, hearts fluttering with anticipation. For Ava Morgan, 16, and her younger brother Jalen, 14, this trip marked a milestone, an adventure gifted to them by their father for excelling in school. The hum of passengers boarding buzzed softly around them, but to the Morgans, it all felt surreal. Ava tucked her modest backpack beneath the seat with practiced care, her movements composed and deliberate. She glanced over at Jalen, who was fiddling with his seatbelt in wide-eyed wonder. With a calm smile, she reached over and helped him snap it into place. It was their first time flying alone, and certainly their first experience in first class. Jalen pressed his face to the window, marveling at the planes moving on the tarmac, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Ava leaned back, thumbing through the in-flight magazine, her mind balancing pride and a quiet sense of responsibility. She had promised their father she'd look after Jalen. This wasn't just a flight, it was a test of independence, and she was determined to handle it gracefully. As passengers continued boarding, a woman made her way down the aisle with confident steps. Her name was Deborah Lang, the airline's most senior flight attendant, known for her ironclad composure and no-nonsense attitude. Her uniform was immaculate, her demeanor crisp and commanding. She greeted each passenger with a rehearsed smile, every movement deliberate. But when Deborah's eyes landed on Ava and Jalen, her expression subtly changed. Her smile faltered. A wrinkle of confusion flickered across her brow. She scanned the cabin, as though expecting someone else to be seated in their row. Without hesitation, she approached. "Excuse me," she said curtly, her tone slightly raised. "Are you sure these are your assigned seats?" Ava looked up, startled but polite. She handed over both boarding passes with steady hands. "Yes, ma'am. Seats 1A and 1B. Deborah examined the tickets, her lips pressing into a thin line. She handed them back without a word of thanks. "These are first-class seats," she said pointedly. "Are your parents traveling with you?" Ava shook her head, her voice calm but soft. "No, we're flying alone." Deborah narrowed her eyes, placing her hands firmly on her hips. "There may be a mistake," she said, her voice rising just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "These seats are typically reserved for premium passengers. I need to verify with the manifest." A flush crept across Ava's cheeks as whispers stirred around them. Jalen squirmed in his seat, the joy on his face quickly dimming. Ava reached over and gently squeezed his hand, her heart pounding, unsure of what exactly was happening, but knowing she had to protect him from the embarrassment that was building. Deborah turned on her heel and walked briskly to the front of the plane, leaving the siblings in a bubble of uncomfortable silence. Ava focused on her breathing, trying to quell the growing panic in her chest. Moments later, Deborah returned. Her expression was cold and official. She stopped beside their row and addressed them loudly. "There's definitely an error," she announced, loud enough for several rows to hear. "These seats are assigned to premium clientele. I'm going to have to ask you both to move to economy." Ava's stomach dropped. Jalen looked around nervously, confusion written across his face. Ava lifted the tickets again, her voice trembling. "But our dad booked these for us." Deborah barely glanced at the passes. Ticketing errors happen, especially when minors fly alone. Your correct seats are in the rear cabin. Please gather your belongings. The whispers intensified. Some passengers turned away awkwardly. Others watched unabashedly, as if it were a show. Ava's face burned with humiliation. Quietly, she stood and motioned for Jalen to do the same. They gathered their things with deliberate calm, every step toward the back of the plane feeling heavier than the last. Deborah watched them go with her arms crossed, satisfied. Ava didn't look back. They settled into two seats near the back of the economy cabin, Ava helping Jalen buckle in again. He leaned toward her, whispering, "Did we do something wrong?" She shook her head gently. "No, we didn't do anything wrong." But her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. Her fingers typed quickly, sending a message to their father. "Dad, something happened. They didn't believe we belonged in first class. We're in economy now." She hit send. She didn't know what would come of it. But what she couldn't know then was that that one message would ignite a firestorm. Up front, Deborah continued her duties, seemingly unbothered. To most observers, the issue had been resolved, just a minor seating confusion. Only a few passengers cast uneasy glances toward the back. Deborah, in her mind, had simply preserved order. In economy, Ava tried to distract Jalen with videos on her phone. He giggled softly at a cat clip, and she felt a small relief. But inside, her stomach was still twisted. Her phone buzzed again. It was their father. "Tell me everything. Who moved you?" Ava responded immediately with a full explanation. His reply came back just as fast. "Stay calm. I'm taking care of it." She didn't know what he meant, but she trusted him. Jalen looked at her, concern flickering. "Is he mad?" "No," Ava said, brushing his shoulder softly. "He's just going to fix this." Up front, Deborah sipped a cup of coffee, satisfied. But then Emily, a younger flight attendant, approached hesitantly. "Deborah," she said, "are you sure those kids weren't supposed to be in first class?" Deborah rolled her eyes. "Emily, you've worked enough flights to know when something doesn't add up. They didn't fit the profile." What she didn't know was that her words would soon unravel everything. The cockpit phone rang. Deborah picked it up. Lang speaking. The captain's voice was calm but firm. "Deborah, we've received a call from corporate. There's a serious complaint. Please report to the cockpit." Deborah's hand tightened around the phone. A knot formed in her chest. She walked briskly to the front, oblivious to how much was about to change. Inside the cockpit, the captain and first officer were seated, their expressions unreadable. A screen was active with a live video call. An executive stared back. "This is Mr. Fletcher," the captain said, COO of the airline. The man on the screen leaned in slightly. "Miss Lang, can you explain why 2 passengers were removed from first class without verifying their tickets?" Deborah stiffened. "There was a misunderstanding. I followed protocol. These were legitimate tickets," the executive interrupted. "Ava and Jalen Morgan are the children of our CEO, Mr. Calvin Morgan. You humiliated them publicly." Deborah's face went pale. I didn't know," she stammered. "They didn't look like typical." "We don't judge passengers by how they look," Fletcher said sharply. "You are to apologize immediately and escort them back to first class. Disciplinary measures will follow." Deborah nodded, stunned. The screen went dark. Her hands shook as she made her way back. At the rear, Ava looked up, her face unreadable. Deborah stopped in front of them. "Miss Morgan, Master Morgan, I made a serious mistake," she said softly. "You belong in first class. I'd like to escort you back now, if you're willing." Ava studied her. "You were very sure we didn't belong," she said quietly. "What?" Deborah's voice cracked. "I judged based on appearance. I was wrong." Ava didn't say much, just nodded. She stood, helped Jalen up, and walked with quiet dignity to the front. The first-class cabin fell silent as they returned. No glares, just an air of realization. "Thank you," Ava said, settling into her seat. "If you need anything," Deborah trailed off, then turned and walked away. Later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Please remain seated. We have a matter to address before disembarking." 2 security officers entered the plane. They approached Deborah. "Miss Lang," one said, "you need to come with us. Management needs to speak with you." Gasps rippled through the cabin as she was escorted out. Back inside the terminal, Calvin Morgan was waiting. He pulled his children into a tight embrace. "You both handled that with courage," he said. Turning to the airline executives nearby, his voice grew colder. "This isn't just about my kids. It's about every passenger. I expect change, immediate and lasting." That evening, Deborah sat alone, staring at her uniform. She couldn't undo what had happened, but maybe she could learn from it. She opened her laptop and began to write. Subject, apology. "Dear Mr. Morgan, Ava, and Jalen, I am deeply sorry for how I treated you. I made assumptions that caused pain and embarrassment. I've begun to reflect on how bias clouds judgment. I accept all consequences and hope to grow beyond this moment. Deborah Lang. She hit send. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. In the months that followed, she attended mandatory bias training, volunteered at community centers, and spoke to new staff about dignity in service. Slowly, the airline changed. Policies were updated. Conversations opened, and passengers noticed. As for Ava, she shared her story at school, gently, thoughtfully, and people listened. Awareness began to grow. She didn't become angry. She became a voice of change. And though Ava and Deborah never met again, they were forever connected. Two people who had shared a moment of pain. Two people who chose, in their own ways, to grow beyond it. And that made all the difference. As spring shifted into summer, life for Ava and Jalen gradually returned to a familiar rhythm. School projects, after-school activities, and weekend bike rides through their neighborhood. Yet beneath the surface, something inside them had changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there in how they carried themselves, how they noticed things, how they responded when others were treated unfairly. At school, Ava had become known not just as a top student, but as someone classmates sought out when they needed to talk. Her voice was soft, but her words were clear. A few teachers even invited her to speak during advisory sessions. Not to relive what happened, but to explore how students could be more mindful, kinder, and less quick to judge. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes she saw the same flicker of doubt in adults' eyes that Deborah had shown. But Ava had learned to stand firm. One afternoon, she sat on a bench outside the school library when a younger student, maybe 12, approached shyly. His name was Malik, a quiet boy who was often picked last during group activities. He sat beside her, silent for a long moment. "Is it true?" he finally asked. "What happened to you on the plane?" Ava turned to him and nodded. "Yeah, it's true." He looked down at his hands. "That kind of stuff happens to my big sister, too. People think she doesn't belong in certain places." Ava's heart ached. It shouldn't happen to anyone. But if it does, you speak up. Or find someone who will stand up with you. That's how it starts to change. Malik didn't say anything right away. Then he gave a small nod, the kind that meant everything. Meanwhile, Jalen, once shy and hesitant, had begun to find his own voice. During a history class discussion about fairness and civil rights, he raised his hand and, with quiet certainty, told his classmates what it felt like to be judged for something as simple as where you sat on a plane. His teacher paused, then thanked him, not just for sharing, but for making the lesson real. Their father, Calvin Morgan, watched his children evolve with both admiration and quiet sorrow. He wished they hadn't had to learn these lessons so young, but he was proud of how they turned hurt into purpose. At the airline, changes continued. Every new hire now underwent immersive training on unconscious bias and customer dignity. Deborah Lang became a key part of those sessions, not because she was obligated, but because she chose to be. She never portrayed herself as a victim or even a reformed hero. She spoke simply, openly, and owned her mistake. "I thought being professional meant being efficient," she said during one session. "But professionalism without humanity is just cold policy. I had to learn that the hard way. And now, I'm trying to be part of the solution." Over time, new recruits stopped seeing her as a cautionary tale and began to see her as someone who embodied what it meant to grow. Her uniform felt different now, not a badge of seniority, but of humility and service. Then came the day when Ava received a letter in the mail, not an email, but a real letter, handwritten. "Dear Ava, I hope this note finds you well. You don't owe me anything, not your time, not your grace, but I wanted to thank you. Not just for how you handled that day, but for how you chose not to meet cruelty with cruelty. Because of your calm strength, I found the courage to look at myself honestly. I've begun a journey I should have started a long time ago. You may never fully know the ripple your actions caused, but I see it every day in my colleagues, in the passengers, and most of all, in myself. With deep respect, Deborah Lang." Ava read the letter twice, then a third time. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed deeply, let the words settle, and tucked the letters safely in the box where she kept things that mattered. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, Calvin looked at his children, so much older in spirit now than they had been just months ago. "You two have no idea how proud I am," he said. "Not because of what happened, but because of how you responded. You showed the world something powerful." Jalen looked up from his plate, curious. "What do you mean?" Calvin smiled. "You showed that strength isn't about fighting back with fists or anger. It's about standing your ground with dignity. That kind of strength that changes things." Later, as Ava lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about all of it. The embarrassment, the long walk down the aisle, the way people had looked at them. It still hurt, but it didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a scar, faded, but always there. A reminder not just of pain, but of survival and growth. She rolled over and looked at her phone. A message from one of her teachers had come in. "Would you consider helping us develop a new curriculum on empathy and inclusion? Your insight would mean a lot." She stared at the screen, heart quietly swelling. "Yes," she replied. "I'd love to." Outside her window, the night was still. But in Ava's heart, there was motion, quiet, steady, and full of purpose. The kind of motion that keeps going even when no one is watching. And somewhere, high above, another flight prepared for takeoff. A first-class seat waited, and this time, no one would question who belonged in it.